All right, today we're doing more than just a math lesson. We are unlocking a new superpower. Seriously. We're going to take factoring and turn it into this incredibly fast way to solve some pretty complex-looking equations. So let's get right into it and unlock that power. Okay, take a look at this. At first glance, it looks kind of messy. You've got an x squared over here, some other terms over there. Where do you even begin to figure out what x is? Well, what if I told you that by the end of this, you're going to have a technique, a kind of algebraic superpower that can crack this exact problem in under a minute? Yeah, that's what we're here to do. And the key to this whole thing isn't some crazy, complicated formula. Nope, it's a really simple, kind of beautiful idea called the zero product property. This is our secret weapon. It makes everything else fall into place. The power of this property is just how simple it is. Think about it. If you multiply two things, let's call them A and B, and your answer is 0, well, then either A had to be 0 or B had to be 0, right? There is literally no other way to multiply two numbers and get 0. It's a fundamental truth, and we are going to exploit it. And here we go. This is probably the single most important rule you need to remember. There's a reason it's called the zero product property. It only, and I mean only, works for the number 0. You absolutely positively must have your equation set equal to 0 for any of this to work. And this slide just shows you why. I mean, if A times B equals 10, does A have to be 10? Of course not. A could be 2 and B could be 5. Or A could be -1 and B could be -10. There are tons of possibilities. But if A times B equals 0, the possibilities just collapse. One of them has to be 0. And that certainty, that's our power. So, how do we actually put this secret weapon to use? It's a simple 3-step strategy. Let's call it the training plan for your new superpower. Here it is. This is the entire game plan. First, you get everything on one side so the equation equals 0. Super important. Second, you factor it. The whole point here is to break one big problem into a couple of much smaller, bite-sized pieces. So you pull out any common factors, then break down what's left. And third, you use the superpower. You split those factors apart, set each one equal to 0, and solve the tiny little equations that are left. Let's see how it works. Let's start with a classic. X squared plus 5x plus 6 equals 0. Now, notice, step 1 is already done for us. The equation is already set to 0. That's nice. So we can jump straight into factoring. Okay, following our plan, first we factor. This trinomial breaks down into x plus 2 times x plus 3. Now for step 2, the magic step. We use the zero product property. Since these two things multiply to 0, we can just split them up. We get two little mini problems. If x plus 2 equals 0, then obviously x is -2. And if x plus 3 equals 0, then x is -3. And just like that, boom, we have our two solutions. All right, let's level up a little bit. This one looks a little more intimidating, mostly because of that 2 hanging out in front of the x squared. But don't worry, the training plan is exactly the same. Okay, so the factoring part here is a bit trickier. You might need to use something like the AC method, but the core strategy doesn't change at all. Once we get those factors, 2x minus 1 and x plus 4, we do the exact same thing we did before. We split them, set each to 0, and solve. And our answers are 1/2 and -4. See, the system just works. Hey, remember this guy, the challenge from the very beginning? Well, guess what? You now have all the tools you need. So let's put that training to the test and knock this thing out, right now. So the crucial, absolute #1 most important thing is step 1. We can't do anything until we move that 4x and that 12 over to the left side. We have to set it equal to 0. Once we do that, it's just like the other problems. We factor it down to x minus 6 times x plus 2, split them up, and solve. Our solutions? X equals 6 and x equals -2. Problem solved. Okay, so now that you have this power, we need to talk about the common traps. Mastering a skill isn't just about knowing what to do, it's also about knowing what not to do. Oh man, this is such a classic mistake. It is so tempting to see x squared equals 5x and just think, I'll divide both sides by x. But look what happens. If you do that, you get x equals 5, and you completely lose the other perfectly good solution, x equals 0. The right way? Follow the plan. Set it to 0, then factor out that common x. That way, you find all the solutions every single time. And this trap is all about misusing our superpower. If two factors multiply to 8, you can't just assume one of them is 8. That logic only, and I mean only, works for 0. You have to do the work. You have to multiply it all out, move that 8 over so the whole thing equals 0, and then refactor from scratch. Okay, this is all great, but what's the point? Like, when would you ever actually use this in real life? Well, let's look at the payoff and see how this abstract skill can answer a very real question. So imagine you've got a rocket. Its height over time is given by this fancy equation. And we want to know, when does it hit the ground? Well, what does hitting the ground really mean? It just means the height is 0. And all of a sudden, we've got an equation that we know exactly how to solve. We just set that height equation to 0. Then we factor out the greatest common factor, which is negative 16t. Then we do our split and solve move, which gives us 2 answers for the time, t. And finally, we have to interpret them. T equals 0. Well, that's the launch, when the rocket was on the ground to begin with. T equals 4 is the other time it's on the ground, which must be the landing. So, the rocket hits the ground after exactly 4 seconds. How cool is that? We just used factoring to predict a real physical event. So, we've unlocked the strategy. We've learned how to avoid the common traps, and we even applied it to a real-world problem. You now have this skill in your toolkit. So the only question left is, what problems are you going to solve with this superpower? Thanks for tuning in.